They said it would never happen, so why is everyone suddenly talking about a Pride and Prejudice 2 like it's already real? I'm not even kidding, this might be one of the most unexpected comebacks in movie history. A sequel, after 20 years. Like who woke up one day and said, you know what we need? More Darcy walking dramatically in the mist. And honestly, I'm not complaining. So here's where things start to get a little suspicious. Over the past few months, there's been way too much noise around Pride and Prejudice. Re-releases, anniversary celebrations, trending clips all over social media, and suddenly, insiders are whispering about a sequel already being in early development. Coincidence? Yeah. I don't think so. Because let's be real for a second, Hollywood is obsessed with reviving iconic stories right now. Sequels, reboots, spin-offs, nothing is safe. And if there's one love story that people would actually show up for again, it's Elizabeth and Darcy. I mean, enemies to lovers. Pride, misunderstandings, slow burn tension. That formula still works better than half the stuff we're getting today. But here's the real question, what exactly would a sequel even look like? The original story wrapped things up pretty nicely, right? Marriage, happy ending, everyone dancing like their lives depended on it. But be honest, was that enough? We spent almost the entire movie watching them misunderstand each other, argue, and fight their feelings, and then boom, it's over just when things get good. So now imagine this, what if the sequel doesn't just revisit them, but shows us everything we missed? Years of marriage. Real life. Not just romance, but what happens after the perfect ending. Because let's not pretend everything stayed perfect forever. You're telling me Elizabeth Bennet and Mr. Darcy never argued again? Yeah. I'm not buying that. And this is where things get even more interesting. There are rumors, strong ones, that the sequel could introduce a next generation. And no, not in a cheap, let's just make more sequels for money kind of way. Think about it. If Elizabeth and Darcy had a child, what would that even look like? Smart, sharp, probably a little stubborn, maybe a little too much like both of them combined. And if the story shifts focus onto that character, we're not just getting nostalgia, we're getting a whole new love story built on everything we loved before. But here's the twist, what if their child's love story isn't smooth at all? What if it's messy, complicated, maybe even worse than what Elizabeth and Darcy went through? Because let's be honest, the best part of the original wasn't the happy ending. It was the tension. The misunderstandings. The slow realization that maybe, just maybe, they were wrong about each other. Now imagine that energy, but with higher stakes. New characters. New drama. And possibly even more emotional damage. And speaking of new characters, we need to talk about the cast rumors. Because this is where things start to feel very real. There's already speculation that the sequel won't rely only on returning faces. Instead, it might bring in a completely fresh lineup for the younger generation, actors who can carry the story forward while still keeping that classic charm. And honestly, that's probably the smartest move they could make. But here's the problem, replacing or even adding to such an iconic cast is risky. Like, are we really ready to accept new faces in a world that feels so specific? So familiar? Or is this one of those situations where no matter how good the casting is, people are still going to say, it's not the same? And yet, what if it actually works? What if the new cast ends up being just as iconic, or somehow even more addictive to watch? Because if there's one thing we've learned, it's that audiences love a good obsession. And if this sequel delivers even half the emotional chaos of the original, people are going to be hooked all over again. But wait, here's where things take a turn. Because while everyone's busy talking about the story and the cast, almost no one is asking the biggest question of all. What if this sequel doesn't just continue the story, but completely changes how we see Elizabeth and Darcy forever? And this is where everything gets a little uncomfortable. Because what if the sequel doesn't give us the fairy tale we've been holding on to for years? What if it actually shows us the reality behind that perfect ending? Think about it. We all romanticized Elizabeth and Darcy like they were the definition of happily ever after. But real life doesn't just freeze after a wedding. People change. Feelings evolve. And sometimes, love gets complicated in ways you didn't expect. So what if the sequel leans into that? There are already whispers that the story might explore cracks in their marriage. Not in a dramatic, over-the-top way, but in a subtle, emotional way that actually makes you question everything. Like, what happens when two strong personalities, who once clashed so hard, have to spend years together making real decisions? Are they still perfectly in sync, or are there moments where that old tension creeps back in? And honestly, would that ruin the story? Or make it even more real? Because imagine watching Darcy, not as the mysterious, untouchable man, but as someone dealing with responsibility, pressure, maybe even regret. And Elizabeth, still sharp, still independent, but now facing choices that aren't so simple anymore. Suddenly, this isn't just a love story. It's something deeper. Something a little more dangerous. But don't worry, it's not all heavy drama. Because if the sequel is really going for the classic Pride and Prejudice energy, then we have to talk about the other couples. Jane and Bingley. Yeah, they better still be disgustingly in love. Like, if they show up even slightly unhappy, I think the entire internet is going to lose it.